heart to heart.
For the first section of this podcast, we've been talking about where you begin your spirituality, where the foundation is found. Is it found in you, or is it found in the Creator? Those are two very different things that our first few sessions talked about. Now we're into part 2, where we're talking about struggles and troubles, and the problem of pain, which I believe is the greatest challenge to faith, the greatest difficulty of belief in a theistic God. And so far we've established some ideas, and I think they could be summarized by saying that troubled circumstances and evil intent are inevitable. They do occur, and it's an opportunity for us to decide whether we're going to accept that they're inevitable and try to work from there, or whether we're going to try to always fight against it and deny it and lose a battle because they are inevitable. This week, we're going to begin talking about some of the possible benefits. We've been sharing those in the comments for a couple of weeks. I want to give you my 5 possible benefits of trouble. But this week, you talked about examples in which troubles helped build strength. That was our question last week. It wasn't really a question. It was we were asking for your comments. And so let's just go through some of the examples that you gave from that. The first one, suffering is inevitable. The Bible says it, and that was good enough for someone. Another, without trouble, it's impossible to know peace. You have to have the struggle to find the peace. That's an interesting idea. And then one commenter really got deep and vulnerable and opened up their world to us. Thank you so much to that commenter. They said that they've been experiencing a mess, and they described a lot of the mess. But one of the things I pulled out of that was that the indication that they were trying to make was, yeah, I've been in a mess, which actually equips me, makes me better able, so that you can count on me if you get into a big mess, because I know I've been in a big mess. And so I'm going to be more tolerant and more open and more interested in helping. That's a really interesting view in which struggle brings benefit. The same commenter said that their last struggle probably seems like the worst because it's the most recent, and it's much more vivid, and they haven't gotten through it. They haven't resolved it, and so it feels much harder. Another commenter mentioned that in tennis, without the struggle of missing the serve, they wouldn't practice, and they didn't have the motivation to practice their serve to get better. And then somebody else talked about a philosophy of punishment, of discipline, that basically without discipline, then we aren't aware of weakness. That one of the benefits of a struggle or of pain is that it indicates something. And so that's another interesting idea. And then another commenter said that cited the example of Michael Jordan. Do you remember the story of Michael Jordan in high school, that he was cut from his high school basketball team? Sort of a famous story. So he didn't make his basketball team. Michael Jordan, the greatest player ever in the NBA, at least arguably one of the few, and he didn't make it in high school, and that caused him to go back and really commit himself to more and more practice. So. And then there was one other comment that had an interesting thought too. Sometimes struggles aren't as big as they seem. That they feel bigger than they really are. And when you really focus on the struggle, it seems to dissipate. It seems to be less of a struggle. That's another thing about focusing on struggle, that can happen. So on the next slide, I just want to show you my 5 things. Over the next few weeks, we're going to go through these. So this week, we're going to talk about how it purifies us. Let's take a look at that. Let me just tell you a story about a friend of mine, Dr. C, an MD, and he would be the guy that you'd go to if you were sick at camp. And so I met him, and he uses a wheelchair and has some disabilities. And so one day there were a couple of us actually talking about this question of pain. So we're actually sort of arguing about whether God could really allow pain, and how that could be possible. All these people with disabilities, that how could God let that happen? And so we were arguing, and while we were arguing, Dr. Chris rolled up, and he didn't say much for a little bit, and then after listening to our argument, he said, "Could I say something?" And he said, "Well, my favorite part of Christianity and my favorite part of the Bible is Hebrews 11 and 12. And in Hebrews 11 and 12, it cites all the great people of the Bible and explains how they went through struggles, the troubles that they had. And I view that trouble and struggle is part of being, of growing your faith, of expanding your faith." I didn't fully understand that at the time. It made me question, sort of thinking about what that meant. How could a disability purify your strength? And yet, here's a guy with experience telling me that it did, at least for him. And so I've thought about that a lot in that conversation with Dr. C. If you look up in the dictionary, you look up purity or purify, you'll find that that's just removing contaminants from something. It's leaving the pure, the basic substance and getting rid of all the contaminants from the picture. That's what it means. That's the opposite of polluting, where you're adding contaminants. You're adding harmful or poisonous substances to the purity and making it less pure. And so that's my view, is that trouble can either purify us or it can pollute us. And that's the part of what life is about, and that's what faith is about, making sure that that we're leaning toward the purification side. Let me show you a Bible verse on this passage. Let me just read this to you. In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. These have come so that your faith, of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may be proved genuine and may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. Let me just make 2 points out of that. I want to show you just 2 different slides that highlight a couple of words in here. Notice these words. First, faith, right there in the middle. These have come so that your faith, which is of greater worth than gold. So faith is more important than gold. But then it goes on to explain why. It's more important than gold because gold perishes. Gold actually does not last forever, even though it seems like it. It's a gem and it lasts. But your faith is even more, it's not a gem, but it's a precious metal. Your faith is even more precious than gold. The preciousness of who you are, the preciousness of your faith is more significant than gold. And even gold that has gone through that even though it has been refined by fire, it still goes away. So it's a real fun passage that's talking about refiner's fire. Now, if you do a Google search on Bible refiner's fire, you'll find all sorts of resources. It's an image that's all through the Old and New Testaments, the Hebrew scriptures and the Christian scriptures. It's just all over it, refiner's fire. And that's what's being talked about, that you take gold, you melt it down, and if it's really pure, the gold will remain, and you will see whether there was stuff added to the gold or whether the gold was pure or whether there was a hole in the middle of it so it wasn't solid gold. But it becomes solid gold when you melt it down. When it goes through that refining fire, it becomes pure. So that's the idea. The next thing I want to show you is more about faith. Notice that that faith, when you suffer grief, your faith, in a similar way to the refiner's fire, is proved genuine. You see, so just like gold goes through a refiner's fire, faith goes through suffering to prove its purity. And so that's where I'm getting the concept, the biblical concept, that purity comes through purity of faith, purity of that preciousness within the preciousness of who you are, comes through the refining fire of suffering, of trouble. The other possibility is that that same trouble could cause pollution and could bring more struggle with it. So that's the question. Are you allowing suffering and troubles and all sorts of trials and tribulations to purify you? Not in some weird spiritual way, but in a way that you get back to the basics, that you really are drawn into what matters, where things begin, what the starting point of everything is. That's the refining fire, removing impurities and getting to a more and more pure understanding, a simpler and just straightforward access to the essential elements of faith. That's my idea, that troubles bring purified faith. I'm interested in what you think about that. Would you leave your comments about what your reaction to this statement is? Troubles can purify us. What do you think of that? Troubles can purify us. Do you think I'm onto something here, or you think I'm off the mark? What's your view? Regarding anything that I said this week, please leave a comment along those lines. I'm going to give you a few minutes of contemplative music to listen to that, but thank you for coming by and letting me talk about this idea that trouble might actually help purify our faith. So thanks for coming, and we'll be back next Monday with Let's Talk Heart to Heart. We'll see you then.